everyone. Welcome to episode either 31 or 32, because I can't remember off the top of my head. But this is the Current Review podcast. And today we have an interesting guest on. His name is Michael Farkas, and he was the founder, or sorry, is the founder still of Blink Charging Solutions, which I'm sure lots of us are familiar with when we go on road trips. And currently now NextNRG, which is a new charging company that is kind of working on a lot of interesting stuff, including wireless charging. But I think the big thing with you, Michael, is the fact that you've been in the space for quite a while, a lot earlier than I think a lot of us have been. So can you kind of like paint the picture of you entering the EV space and some like big shifts you've seen in your time?
Okay, I've seen all the shifts. Literally, when I started the business, there were really two key players in the space. One was Tesla, and the other one was Better Place, coming out of Israel. Tesla at the time was they only had the Roadster on their roadmap. That was the only vehicle they had. This was before the Model S was conceived or any of the other vehicles thereafter. So they were not in the charging space at that time. They were focused solely on the vehicles. Similarly, Better Place, they didn't produce the vehicles. They acquired them from and had Renault manufacture them for them. But they were in the swapping business. They would actually literally have the battery swapped out of the charger of the vehicle, charged separately, and then put back into the vehicle. I realized, seeing both of those companies, that there's a huge void, and that would be fueling the vehicles. And if you study the automotive industry, and that's really been really a passion of mine my entire life, you realize that it's not the car companies who make the money, but it's those that supply the fuel to those companies, to those vehicles. Historically, 99 plus percentage of all auto manufacturers have gone bankrupt. Those that make a tremendous amount of money are those who supply the fuel. It's like the razor and the blade model, and it is really the pinnacle of that model. And the fuel is where the money was at. So I realized, number one, there was a technological vacuum. There was a void that needed to be filled. Tesla at that time was literally you were plugging your car into the wall and fueling your vehicle that way. And also Better Place, they were plugging them into the wall, which took a very, very long period of time, or they were swapping out those batteries. After seeing the electrification of the automobile program, which was actually initiated by Bush, not by Obama, most people think that it was Obama who created it. It was Bush who created it, Obama who dispensed the funds. And realizing how much money was being spent to electrify the automobile, I realized that the biggest money maker being completely overlooked. In that bill, in that program, there was not $1 earmarked towards charging infrastructure. It was all for building the cars, building the buildings to build the cars in, batteries, and so on and so forth, but nothing really on the charging side. And that's when I conceived of the idea of Blink, which was formerly known as a car charging group. And my first, my first efforts were really not about the technology, but going out there and looking at it as a land grab and realizing that these vehicles need somewhere physical to go charge. So I started partnering with different property owners, municipalities, throughout the country and then ultimately globally, to lock down those locations. And as more and more cars were introduced, I started introducing different charging technologies. Initially, we partnered with a company back then, which was known as Coulomb Technologies, which is now known as ChargePoint.
Mhm.
And we were the buyers of their equipment when really nobody else was. We were deploying charging infrastructure. 110, 110-volt units, level ones that had like a plate on them that popped up when you had a payment system. And literally it's just like plugging it into your wall, the same power and speed. And that was a band-aid measure just to have something on the streets. We deployed a lot of that infrastructure. Unfortunately, we had to pull it out of the ground. It became obsolete pretty quickly when they developed the J1772 standards. And then unfortunately, again, another upgrade, because the speed of the charging stations were low. Knowing that standard when it came out, that it was an 80 amp standard, which would allow for 19.2 kilowatts of charging, and seeing the evolution of it, we had no choice at Blink but to go out there and manufacture our own equipment. So I designed the first AC level 2 charging station in the world that had 80 amps, which maxed out the energy transfer rate of that technology. But this was way before DC fast chargers and Back then it was Chatamo, and there was no, none of this stuff existed. It didn't. It wasn't even on, it wasn't even someone's thought process at that point in time. But then, as the business grew again, we stayed focused on going out there and looking at this as a land grab. And because of my past history on Wall Street and being very involved in M&A, we grew Blink through two methodologies. One was organically, going out there day after day, partnering with more property owners. But we also had a strategy of going out there and buying our competitors. And we acquired, I think it was maybe 13 or 14 companies when I led the company. And it was a great strategy. It allowed us to really quantify what we were acquiring, what we knew we were going to be able to deploy. And for the most part, it was really locations, more and more locations that we would ultimately deploy our charging infrastructure as more and more cars got on the road.
Nice. And so now that you've gone on to NextNRG, right? What do you see as like the next evolution, right? Standards are starting to come about with a little bit of, back and forth between CCS, NACS, CCS2 in Europe, that sort of thing. But I think it's starting to sort of warrant out, right? And then even on the technology side, OCPP is starting to establish some standards on the data side, which is, I think, the cause of a lot of frustrations that a lot of people don't understand, interoperability and that sort of thing. But it sounds like we're finally growing up. Hopefully.
Not as much as we should. Not as much as we should. Unfortunately, interoperability is really not fully there yet, where you could just roll up to any charging station and use that one app that will engage all the different charging stations. The charging companies still have islands, and they believe that they're protecting their domain by doing that, but they're not realizing that they're limiting the industry. And with interoperability, true interoperability, where you have to pull out a whole bunch of different apps and have different accounts and cards and all that kind of nonsense, that would actually allow the industry to grow, which would raise the tides for everybody. But unfortunately, most of the operators, most of them are really short-sighted, and they don't look past their own 2 feet in front of them. But true interoperability, like you go to a gas station, you can pull out your credit card, throw into any tank, whether it's any oil company that there is, you could roll up to that place and not have to pull with different cards. So I think the industry needs to get to that point. It hasn't yet. And maybe it'll take someone like me maybe getting back into that space, in wired charging for that to happen. But it's still not there.
Yeah, fair. So then what was the inspiration to go wireless?
The inspiration to go wireless actually predated the founding of Car Charging Group in Blink. Okay, so I'll give you a little bit of history. A few more months before I actually formalized Blink, I read about the electrification program from Bush. I realized there was a lot of money being spent, billions, tens of billions of dollars to electrify the automobile. But I'm still trying to formulating my plan how I can get in there. I saw the most amazing TED Talk on a company called Witricity. And on that TED Talk, they had a television that was being powered wirelessly, and it blew my mind. And when I created Blink, my intent was for wireless charging to be the predominant way of fueling EVs. The technology took a lot of time to develop. But when I first started the company, my mindset was I need to go after the municipalities and turn those relationships into different phases. First, wired charging, because that's really what was going to happen. And then ultimately, because I had those contracts and those exclusive agreements with those municipalities, would take that and ultimately deploy that infrastructure in the streets and have dynamic wireless EV charging, which I knew would ultimately take place. Took a little bit longer than I thought, but again, the plan made sense. Get the locations, lock down those locations, and as the technology develops, whether it's wired or wireless, once you own those locations, you can deploy what you want. So that was really our mindset. And I have to tell you, the technology is now here. We're now seeing the standards for wireless. When you look at all the issues with wired charging, typically they have an old saying, the chain breaks at its weakest link, right? What is the weakest link of charging today? Is that cord. That cord, people don't plug it in properly sometimes. They come back and they don't have charge. A lot of times those cords are getting cut. I can't tell you how many times we had to go in there because of theft, going in there and having to replace cords. I mean, you could Google, Tesla cord cutting or EV charging station cord cutting, and this is globally. You have something that's out in the open, people just go there, snip it off, and then they could go sell it pretty quickly. There's a lot of metal content in others, and they're able to monetize it really, really quickly. And we've seen where literally you could go into a Tesla facility, and you wake up in the morning, the night before, they're all cords. The next day, they're all gone. And that used to happen to us. Happened to us in LA, happened to us in Portland, a bunch of different areas where unfortunately, there are people who are literally living, near some of these charging stations. When you don't have the cord, you don't have that problem. In addition, believe it or not, at Blink, we were sued a few times where people just pretended that they fell on a cord. And the way the insurance companies work is they prefer settling it for 10 or 20, 30,000 than going out there and fighting it. So unfortunately, people are able to use that for their own benefit, really, and it negatively impacts the industry. But bottom line is, get rid of that cord. You have a much, much better solution for the consumer. I mean, just think about it like this. Imagine you buy a car, you set up a payment system in the car the day you buy it, whether it's a mobile wallet, a credit card, and you never, ever have to be involved in the charging process again. You either pull down into the right parking spot that has that wireless capabilities, and your car knows every time I hit that location, you charge, or it's as simple as with dynamic charging, is you drive down the right road, and while you're driving, your car is being filled. That's the passenger market, the personal passenger market. That's heavy duty vehicles and long haul and short haul. But there's another amazing, amazing application that we're working on very heavily. It's not in the streets, but actually in the buildings. So imagine you have logistic companies that have forklifts, robotics, and all these different type of equipment that they have inside their locations. And today, a lot of these companies have duplicate or triplicate of those vehicles because they have to go off to the side and charge for a certain period of time of the day. Now imagine those vehicles on the floor, moving around, doing what they need to do, and being charged while they're in motion. Number one, it decreases the battery size, so you have a lot less cost in that equipment, number one. Number two, it could actually also impact the size and the footprint of the location because those vehicles need to go charge somewhere. It takes up a lot of space. You won't need that anymore. So when you look at the applications that are more for the industrial, warehousing, manufacturing industries, they're a lot sooner to be able to deploy and very, very impactful to their bottom line in many, many different ways. So the wireless charging, it's not only just for, and especially our technology, is not just for passenger vehicles that are going to be driving on the streets and parking in parking lots, but there are many, many applications that are above and beyond that.
That's interesting. That's a great place to start because it's a controlled environment, right?
Bingo.
That heavy utilization, and they care about utilization. Like that's all about bottom line. So you'll
Correct.
get a lot of really good feedback from them. I think that's a
Right.
really interesting place.
And it's much simpler because again, you're in someone's facility, so you don't need all the billing methodologies. You don't need all those other components to it. It's just simple energy transfer, wireless, and you're lighting up the floors. So it's something that's really, really attractive to anyone, in manufacturing, logistics, warehousing. It's a phenomenal solution that saves a lot of money on equipment, on maintenance, the batteries, and on footprint. And again, as you said clearly, when you're looking at passenger vehicle wireless charging, you got to wait for roads to be ripped up. You got to wait for parking spaces to add this technology, and more importantly, you got to get the OEMs to adapt the technology in the vehicles, which takes a long time. Being able to focus on, industrial locations, manufacturing locations, we really are able to get traction quickly, get those deployments done today, and not have to wait for the whole world to change.
Interesting.
It was a pivot of ours. Originally, we were just in passenger vehicles, long and heavy duty, long haul vehicles, and it's going to happen. I believe it's inevitable. It's just a matter of timing. But again, as you mentioned, these are projects and deployments that we could do now without having to wait for the rest of the world to catch up to us.
Interesting. Now, I guess I want to point on like the ecosystem side of things because I feel like this isn't really touched on a lot, but a lot of people are like, oh yeah, we just need a ton of DC fast charging stations to help with EV adoption. But I really think the benefit is just having plenty of level 2 chargers everywhere that you go, like at grocery stores, etc. And I think that's kind of the key to EV adoption. Like I'll give an example, like at college, we had lots of level 2 chargers just all across campus. And for me, it was actually way easier to have an EV on campus than a gas powered car because I get better parking. And it's like, as my car's just sitting there during, if I'm going to the gym or I'm at class, I'm just charging. I'm getting electricity where your gas power is just sitting there and sitting idle, same amount of gasoline as you get back in the car later in the day. But I really think that's the key to EV adoption. Is that kind of your philosophy as well?
If you see, how I developed Blink, our focus was where the money was, and even today, with all these DC fast chargers that have been deployed, I think the number is still 80% of charging is done at home. So if
Mhm.
you have charging infrastructure at home, whether it's single family or multifamily residential, that is where you're going to charge. If you don't have charging there and you have charging at the workplace, that's where you're going to charge. And that's almost all the charging today. There's a lot done on the roads, and that's because people don't have access to charging where they live or where they work. And ultimately, go spend 30, $40,000 for a DC fast charger, or go spend $500 for an AC charger. You get a lot more ACs deployed. And you're right, most people don't realize downtime of automobiles is almost 90% of the time. So why inconvenience yourself to go somewhere, to have to wait somewhere to fuel your vehicle when literally that vehicle could be fueled in its downtime where it's naturally parked anyway? There's no question about it. If you want to have more of a more impactful deployment and spending your dollars wisely, you're better off with high-powered AC charging than you are with these superchargers. Your dollars go a lot further and accomplish a lot more.
It reminds me, and also with your wireless charging, it reminds me of like mobile phone charging. Actually, I was just traveling this past weekend through the airport, and like the early days of smartphones when the phones couldn't last as long as they could when they were just flip phones because you were consuming a lot more energy. I remember traveling to the airport and just like always trying to look for outlets here and there. And now though, the airports, there's just outlets everywhere. And in fact, they actually have the USB, the USB direct outlets that are DC. No, they're not fast, right? But they're
Right.
kind of appropriate for your phone and that type of charge. And it almost feels like that's the shift that has to happen with vehicles, right? It's a behavioral shift from like, oh, I have these big Phillips at a gas pump to just having like plugs everywhere
Right.
and like convenience charging and then like different modes because you've got wireless phone charging at some points in time and at home I just plug it in because it's easier that way, a little bit more efficient. But yeah, it took a while though. I mean, in my mind, even with mobile phones, which feels a little bit easier and accessible, that still took about like 10 years.
Hmm.
I don't know how this is going to be with vehicles.
I think once the standards are set,
Mhm.
and the manufacturers start adopting the technology and they include the receivers on the vehicles, I will tell you without a question. I mean, just think about it. Here's two options. You're driving into a parking garage. There's one spot that has wired chargers, and then one has wireless, and your car has wireless capabilities. What are you pulling into?
Fair.
It's
Yeah.
not. It's not. It's not even a question. And it's more important than that because if you look at it like from a fleet perspective, right? As you guys may know or not, on the easy fill side of our business, we fill up Amazon vehicles, fleet vehicles, for them to deliver their goods, and we fill them up with gasoline and diesel and things like that. Amazon has a lot of Rivians, right?
Hmm.
The post office has some electric vehicles. A lot of fleet companies have vehicles, but the biggest problem is a lot of these guys who are drivers, they plug that vehicle in, they think it's actually charging, they don't know that they didn't shove it in all the way,
Mm.
and they come back to the vehicle the next morning, they get back in their vehicle, they drive, and in the middle of their trip, they're out of gas. And then all of a sudden, Amazon has to go send another vehicle, typically a gas one, unload all the goods, then go do the delivery. There's faults that with wired charging. Unfortunately, it's just human nature. We don't always plug it in right. Sometimes even if it's plugged in, it doesn't charge. A lot of that would be alleviated with wireless charging. And again, it's very cool tech. And when it's released and it's done, you're going to have both stationary as well as dynamic, which is in motion charging. Imagine driving your vehicle and your vehicle is charging while you're driving. That is the
That's
most
cool.
unbelievable, and the technology exists. The communication protocols, the ability for billing, it's all here. It's just a matter of now going out in there and deploying it. But once it's there, the convenience of it is just so off the charts. I don't know anyone else who's going to do anything other than that. It's a game changer. Again, imagine, like I said, you buy a new car, new or old, whatever it may be. You plug in your payment system, and you just set the parameters. I want every time I'm at a half of battery, I want you to fill me up. Every time I'm at a quarter, I want you to fill me up. And you're done. You never have to do it again. You'll get a notification, hey, you're charging, and you'll get a notification, here's your kilowatt hour usage, and here's your billing, and you're done. And it's so seamless and so simple. Imagine never having to go anywhere ever again to fuel your vehicle. And that's what wireless technology allows to take place.
I know
And
it's
so
something that
with
people talk about all the time. Sorry, go ahead, Andrew.
yeah, well, I was going to say, and with the wireless charging right now, so this is, I would assume it's AC charging, and oh, you're doing DC. Interesting. Okay,
And it's
how much
and it's let
details?
me tell you, it's fast.
Wow.
There's over 1 megawatt of wireless charging available already.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, you guys, and let me tell you, what's really also amazing is, um, as you get higher powered in wired charging, right? After you go up to a
Mhm.
certain level, you have to liquid cool that cable, or you're having
Yes.
problems.
Well, I was going to ask, like, when you're charging at that kind of power rate, you have to be generating some decent amount of heat, right? I mean, if you're doing DC wireless, like it's different than like my phone. I know that does wireless, it heats up, like it gets real hot, and actually, I have wireless charging in my EV,
Hmm.
and it stops working. The phone just says your phone is too hot to do wireless charging. We'll turn it back on when the temperature goes back down again. Do you guys have concerns like that at all?
We're seeing less heat than with wired charging.
Oh.
And yes, and
Well,
because of the technology being different, there's energy that is used to cool those DC fast chargers as well as
Mhm.
the cables.
Yeah.
So when you're looking at efficiencies, there's not much loss, and sometimes even better in
interesting.
wireless than wired.
That's crazy.
It's crazy. Let me tell you something. When I first saw the first wireless charging, there's a company called Evatran. And Rebecca, she actually left there. Her father was the head of the company, and she ended up running charging for Tesla for a while.
Okay.
She was when Elon like cut the whole team. She was
Oh,
running Tesla.
Tanucci,
Rebecca.
right?
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
Okay.
Okay. Yeah.
She had a different name before, and she got married in between.
Oh,
So I remember I
okay.
don't remember her maiden name, but her father. I met her father. We were we communicated quite often. Back then, the efficiency of the charge, there was so much loss, like more loss than transfer. If someone had ever told me that you would have efficiencies on par almost at certain power levels, I would have laughed at them years ago. But
Hmm.
that's what's starting to happen.
Wow.
Yeah, it's
I mean,
pretty
that's
cool.
another great selling point as well, right? Like you could help bring in the economics because already, I'll be honest, like DC fast charging rates, in my opinion, have gotten out of hand.
Yeah,
Like 55, 60 cents a kilowatt hour.
it's insane.
It's insane, you know?
The
Yeah.
value proposition disappears. When you look at it from a fleet perspective, right? If you're able to manage your energy properly, right, and you're looking at it from a fleet perspective, you should be spending 15 to 25 cents at most on the dollar using electricity versus using gasoline. And
Hmm.
that's why it's so important for these fleet operators to ultimately adopt EV because they're not about do I have a nicer car or not a nice car. The
Yeah.
guy who's making the decision is not the guy who's driving, right? They're
Mm-mm.
looking at it from dollars and cents. And when you compare an EV delivery vehicle versus an internal combustion vehicle, maintenance you can't compare. I mean,
Hmm.
my last electric vehicle, I didn't go to the dealership once. I never had that car in for service other than some over-the-air upgrades. Tires I needed, okay, no question. You blow them out, they wear because the car's heavier, and windshield wiper blades. And one thing I started doing, having an EV that I never did before, is I actually have to go somewhere and buy windshield washer fluid because I'm not going to the gas station where I'm getting it. So those are the things that change your habits. But there's no maintenance on these things. I mean, there's like 90 some odd percent less moving parts. You're not dealing with all these fluids and all these, it's a lot. They're on the road a lot more than an internal combustion engine vehicle. So when you take into consideration the cost of fuel, when you take into consideration maintenance from a fleet operator's perspective, there's no question of whether or not to adopt EV versus internal combustion engine. And the problem today, and has been for a little while, it's not about the charging stations like it used to be, and it's not about the vehicles anymore. That's not the problem for fleet operators. The problem is, how do they get the electricity to the fleet lot to fill up these vehicles? Because there's not enough electricity being generated for our current needs, let alone for the complete move over mobility from, fuel and gasoline to electricity, as well as take into consideration AI, take into consideration quantum computing, data centers, and all these other things that are adding much more demand on the grid, and ultimately going to add a lot more. So the problem today is not about the vehicles, it's not about the chargers, it's literally about procuring the energy at these locations to fuel the vehicles. And that's why what we're doing at Next is not only looking at the charging, which is a small component of it. When I first started Blink, and we did a deployment, literally 100% of the deployment costs were focused on EV charging. And that's when we had slower chargers, a lot less of them, not DC fast chargers. But as we were going into buildings and needing 5, 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, even 100 chargers in these facilities, or a bunch of DC fast chargers, it wasn't the equipment that cost the money. It was literally getting the energy to those locations economically. That was really the heavy lift, and a majority of the cost of deploying the infrastructure. So that's why I ended up pivoting and moving away from Blink's model and focusing on, hey, guess what? It's really the energy procurement that's really the obstacle over here, and how do we overcome that? And how do we make money doing that? And that's how literally Next came about. It's not really the focus on the charging side, but really more of the energy side. And I'll give you a perfect for instance, right? When I started Blink and I started deploying charging infrastructure, I would have to go out there and negotiate with a property owner, get that contract done. I'd either write a check myself or raise money, and then we deploy charging infrastructure. And then literally every morning thereafter, I would pray to God that someone was going to drive by my charging station and use it. Because if they didn't, I just made a bad investment. Today, when you look at Next and what we're doing, it's not about someone driving by with a charging station. It's about us deploying energy generation assets, our smart microgrid technologies, and not only providing the charging station with energy, but providing the entire facility and the building with energy as well. So it's kind of evolved, realizing really what the shortcomings and really what the needs are for the industry.
Nice. Like you're saying there's like a reevaluation of how we use energy, not just in our vehicles, but throughout the entire building, right?
Throughout,
Like a redistribution of all that.
Correct. And the needs for electricity are getting greater and greater and greater. Again, everyone talks about AI and everyone talks about, data centers. When you look at new quantum computing and you see, how much energy is needed just to cool these chips, not even just to operate these chips in the computers, it's astronomical. And we're going to need to find it somehow. And that's why when you look at what's going on with the current administration and even the prior administration, they have on their focus massive energy generation. And how do they deploy those assets? They're looking at different ways how to do it, nuclear and other ways and so on. But ultimately, I believe you need a nice mix of different ways of generating electricity. I believe renewables are a great way, but there are other ways also. And Next technology really allows to manage the production of that energy much better, and allows for more efficiencies and less need of fuel to satisfy that same demand. And that's kind of what our focus is. We're agnostic as to how you generate electricity in most of our business. And it's really a matter of managing how those assets generate that electricity, and then ultimately how it matches with demand.
Fascinating. What do you think are the biggest hurdles right now, I guess, just with the current EV market? And do you think it's like more in energy? Do you think it's more in charging? Or like, what do you think are the biggest like key
It's
points that
charging.
should be
It's
charging?
fueling. It's definitely fueling. There are a lot of people who went out there and, first to market, like the new technology, and they wanted to try it. And then their biggest hang up was, where do I fuel my vehicle? I live, and this is like a great thing to point to, when when we saw the first Nissan Leaf come out, right? And they had a massive, massive amount of orders. You know, a lot of people went in there and they put in orders, and you know, Obama was talking about it, and Nissan was off the charts in what performance, you know, how they're performing. The problem is once they got those deposits, and then your typical, you know, person came in when they were filling up their options, and they were asked, okay, where are we going to install your charging station? And the guy's like, I don't have a garage. You know, I live in a multi-family. They're not letting me install a charger. Many of those orders disappeared because there was nowhere to fuel those vehicles.
Hmm.
Um, it still exists. You know, there's got to be a better way. There's got to be a easier way for people to fuel their vehicles. And by the way, a lot of it has to do with interoperability, having these systems work with each other, not having to have all these cards. We spoke about it earlier. It's a real pain in the ass to have to, you know, pull out this card, that card. You have to have 5 different accounts. There's a better way. And again, when I was at Blink, I pushed for interoperability probably like nobody else. I was explaining and I was trying to push the auto manufacturers for them to push the charging networks because a lot of them invested in some of these networks and force interoperability. But again, you know, when you look at certain EV charging companies' models, it's about having that closed system. They don't realize that, again, the more people have EVs on the road, the more ultimately they're going to get business. And I think that's probably still the biggest issue is charging infrastructure. Now, is it the charging stations? No. Right now, the issue is about getting the power to those locations. I'll give you for instance, in Miami, a building down the block from me, you know, they had 10, 12 EVs in the garage. People are plugging them into the walls, and they're basically stealing electricity. And you know, I know a couple of people that lived in the building, and they wanted some infrastructure. I met with management. Everybody was gung ho. We went there, and okay, we want to put in a charging station. There's one 30 amp circuit available in the whole building. What are you going to do? Can't really do anything. You got to wait for the utility to get you power and go get in line. You know, Blink handled the postal office contract, and again, the big, you know, they're part of the government. When they ask for electricity, they get it. But if you're someone else other than that, it's you got to wait in line, and there's a long line today.
Are there any promising developments, technology, policy, otherwise, that you think that could help the situation in the next 5 years or so?
You know, the current administration is not as gung ho on forcing any consumer to buy anything. So they're
Mhm.
not putting in as much incentives for people to buy EVs. And financial incentives are a major catalyst.
Mhm.
I think that's problematic. During this administration, I don't know, you know, even as influential as Elon Musk was or is, you know, again, you know, the bills are what they are, you know, so, you know, I don't see America taking a leadership position in EV, you know, over the next couple of years. But ultimately, I'm a car guy. I didn't get into this because I'm an environmentalist, and I've said this for the last 15 years to people who never ask me. I'm a car guy, and I will tell you, you cannot compare in any way, except for the loss of sound, which you could, you know, put it on your headset if you really want to. But from every aspect, an EV outperforms an internal combustion engine car in every way, period.
Yeah.
Now, what's happening is you have the OEMs that because they're seeing some hesitation, they're reintroducing and focusing on a lot of these hybrids,
Yeah.
plug-in hybrids. You know, I have one plug-in hybrid. I have EVs. I think a plug-in hybrid is a foolish band-aid, personally. But the only reason why people feel more comfortable with this is because they could go to a gas station, fill up with gas, and they could go on their way and not have to be worried. But if there's enough charging infrastructure available where everyone feels comfortable, I believe ultimately everyone will switch to an EV. But that is the issue. That is the obstacle, is charging infrastructure everywhere.
Fair. Fair.
And regarding charging, when you're talking about like the payment methods and stuff, like there's always like that idea, like if there's like one app that could interface with all the charging stations, just have your credit card. Do you have any thoughts on that? And maybe is there something like that that
Yeah,
you've even
people
been
have
thinking of?
tried. People have tried. I
Mhm.
mean, if you look at PlugShare prior to it being acquired by EVgo, that was its mission. But as soon as EVgo bought it,
Mhm. They
other
killed it.
charging companies were like, "Hey, I'm not going to open up my system to a competitor."
Yeah.
So everyone again, it's creating these little fiefdoms, and ultimately, who's being negatively impacted is the EV driver and the consumer, and the market's not taking off because The charging companies, in my opinion, and I push for this, should be forced to do it, whether they like it or not. And there was talk of it, and there was, and then you have the, self-regulatory organizations with us saying, hey, we're going to do it on our own, and then we go hem and haw and back and forth. I believe if it was forced upon everyone to do it, then we would see a different industry. We'd see, a lot more EVs on the road. The biggest obstacle to EV deployment is without a question charging infrastructure.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many chargers that I can think of. I mean, even recently, there was a level 2 charger in the parking lot of the hotel I was staying at this past weekend, and it would have been nice to be able to charge overnight, but it was an EV Connect one, and for whatever reason, EV Connect didn't have that charger on its network. It couldn't find it, even though there was a QR code and everything, and so I couldn't get a charge. And
That's a
then,
big problem.
yeah,
You have companies that started in the business that maybe shouldn't have.
Mhm.
This is about technology. You need to make
Yep,
sure that those units are connected.
yep,
One thing that I did and made sure when we were at Blink was I had all of the accounts local on the unit so that if we were ever down, we could still verify that transaction. We may not
and
have
they
been
can get
able
a
to.
charge.
Correct. They
Yeah,
would be able to get a charge, but until that unit then connected back to the network, it wouldn't be able to bill. But for me to bill versus make sure that someone could go on their way, it was more important for me to be able to have someone be able to go on their way. And sometimes you may lose if their credit card expired from the time, it was last
yeah.
uploaded to that
You
unit.
couldn't verify a false
Right.
whatever.
It
Yeah.
is what it is. I'd rather lose a couple of dollars and make sure that our customers were always able to charge whether the units were connecting or not. That was more important to us.
Yeah, I mean, I've always
Unfortunately,
appreciated.
not the same way as it was when I was there, but things
Yeah,
change when you have new management.
things are changing quite a bit. Like I remember early days, Electrify America. Every once in a while, would give you a free charge,
Yes.
because they knew that their service was unreliable. I remember like if it was a 150, and for whatever reason, because of temperatures or something of the system, I was getting less than 50. They would just comp it, which was nice.
That's
That's
nice.
not that's not so much the case anymore. I think they've clamped down on that.
Listen,
But
I have to tell you something. Everybody in the beginning, I don't care who you were, everybody, whether it was Schneider, Siemens, GE, ChargePoint, EV, us, everybody experienced a lot of problems with the equipment in the beginning. It was a new industry.
mhm,
You had high-powered, electrical equipment that's out in the, in the weather, and it's inevitable. So it
mhm,
took time to harden up the equipment. The elements are tough. Snow
mhm.
and I'll tell you a great story I heard in Ukraine, Kharkov actually. Someone there, and actually we used to manufacture there prior to the Russian war. Um, when I went there the first time, someone mentioned to me, "You're not going to believe that there's more charging equipment in Kharkov than there is probably in any other city you'll see." And I was shocked, and I didn't believe him. And I went to Kharkov, and I was driven around. I was blown away. And the funniest thing was, I was like, "Why are all these charging stations so high above the ground?" And the guy laughs. He goes, "Well, because the last time we had a storm, a winter storm, every one of our charging stations, because the snow plows were all offline. Every single one of the snow plows, they don't feel it. They don't know. So
Yeah.
they literally knocked out hundreds and hundreds of charging stations in one day because the weather was above the charging. The snow was above the charging stations. So now they put them up really, really high. We all experienced things that we had to learn. It was a learning curve. This was a new industry experience by guys who never did this before because no one ever did it before. And you learned. And we made mistakes, and the hardware got better, and the networks got better, and protocols became protocols, and things have changed. Now it's a matter of how do we let everything work together seamlessly, and that'll allow for consumers to have a much better experience, and ultimately will drive EV adoption. And I
That's
believe
definitely.
I believe once wireless charging is out, it's a game changer. Because again, I'll tell you something. One of the most amazing things is, for my first few years in the business, right, and up until even a few years ago, there when I drove by someone or saw someone with an EV, okay, I stopped everybody. And I'm
Mm,
not kidding you. Because again, in the beginning, it was like I saw an EV once
yeah.
every few days,
Yeah.
and I mean everybody. If you're on the side of the road, I'd honk you, open up my window. If you were, stationary, I'd knock on your window. So I would say back then, you'd maybe have 60% male drivers 40% female drivers. In the beginning times when I would knock on a window or honk the horn, most females would drive away and not communicate with me. It's
Yeah.
normal. I get it. The men, right, who communicate, and I asked them, what's your favorite thing about having an EV? There were a bunch of different answers. I love the torque. I love this. I love that. But the women who answered me, and I'm not kidding you, there was no deviation from this except for once. I had a girl that had a brand new Model S Tesla, was red. She had like chrome wheels and had all this customized stuff. And she was like, I just love my Tesla. But every other woman I spoke to, and there were hundreds of them, every other one said, when I asked them, what's your favorite thing about having an EV? Like this, I don't have to go to a gas station.
My wife says the same thing.
Without hesitation. I'm
Yeah.
talking hundreds and hundreds. And when it got later, it was over 1,000. Every single person answered me the same thing except for that one girl who had that Tesla Model S.
There's something about the gas station experience that's just not very accommodating, I think, for females.
Okay, I'm going to tell you something. I'm going to tell you, Kimberly Clark, I think it was, did a study, and I think the number was, if I'm not mistaken, there's 13,000 times more germs on the gas pump than at the toilet in the same gas station.
Oof.
I mean, just think about that for a second. That's how bad the gas pumps are.
Yeah.
People are doing all these different types of things, grabbing the gas pump, putting it in their car, putting it back in. You don't know what they're doing with their hands. There's less germs on the toilet than on the gas pump in that same gas station. This is not my data. This is Kimberly Clark, and you can Google this and you can find this. I think it's 13,000, 14,000. I mean, some crazy number. That's number one. It's very dirty. Number two, imagine a woman's getting out of her car. She's standing by herself. Okay.
Very vulnerable.
From a safety perspective, they're terrified. They're in an area they don't know. Any guy could walk over to them, and what are they going to do? So it's an issue. And when you take the fact that so many women, either they're making their own decisions on what vehicles they're purchasing, or they have that influence within the family. Ultimately, when you have wireless charging and you don't have to even plug anything in and you don't have to touch anything, and you can either be driving or you're at a parking spot and you just get out of your car and it's charging. I believe it's going to be so convenient. It's going to be very difficult to pass that up.
So I'm sold on the wireless charging technology. So how long do you expect to see this technology available? Like I'll be on a road trip and there's a wireless charger where I can plug in my EV at.
Plug in.
Or never mind.
Yeah.
I look at it as from the short term, you're going to be in parking spaces. So you'll go like a service center, like you go today. Instead of plugging in your vehicle, you're gonna wirelessly charge your vehicle. But really, the real when you look at the pinnacle of wireless charging, it's not going to be pulling into a spot. It's going to be while you're driving. Dynamic wireless charging. We have technology and patents in that arena. But really, one of the things that we have, which really separates us from everybody, is called bidirectional wireless charging, V2G. Okay, so we have the patent on bidirectional wireless charging. So if you look at charging programs today, right? If you want to have whether it's a municipal deal, whether it's a utility deal, if you want rebates, grants, subsidies, one of the specifications that you need to have on your charging infrastructure is V2G. Otherwise, you're disqualified from those programs. This is for wired charging today, right? Ultimately, the same thing is going to be for wireless charging. California is actually mandating V2G, bidirectional charging, both wired and wireless. There's been talk about it from the governor. There's reciprocity with 13 or 14 states once California adapts that. And that's going to be, as I mentioned, for both wired and wireless. Now, wired, we do not have any IP on that. But wireless, if you want a vehicle to grid charging, which means allowing you from taking the energy from the grid through the charging station and into the car, it also allows you to take that energy from the car into the charging station and back to the grid, so that when the grid is weak, you could use all these batteries all over the place and support the grid. We have the patent on that. It is being mandated in certain states, and once it's done in those states, the car companies don't make cars for 13 states and then makes the cars for the rest. This is also from the network perspective, the charging station perspective, and across the board. So right now, because of that, when you own functionality that's required, it puts you in a very different space. And we're very, very excited because the benefits of having V2G, bi-directional charging, is massive. It will allow a lot less investment in stationary battery storage, by allowing the utilities and the grids to be able to tap into this, into this, mobile battery storage. So it's really interesting stuff.
Interesting. But at least
Very
for,
cool.
like you mentioned, the parking spot chargers, like, is this something we could see within the net before like 2030, for instance?
Oh, for sure,
Okay.
for sure. We're
Just trying
we're
to get a
working on
timeline.
yeah, we're working on a product right now. I guess I'm going to be announcing it here first. And you'll be able to see it in short order, where it's a hybrid charger. It has both a plug as well as the wireless charging pad. So if your
Mm,
vehicle has either of the two, you're able to be charging at our locations. This is for more stationary locations, which will allow for any vehicle to charge. And then as more and more vehicles adopt wireless, we could always pull out the wired piece. But again, there's millions of vehicles that are out there that need that wired charging. They're not going to go retrofit and put a plate under the car. Until those vehicles, are no longer available, we're going to have a product that allow for both to take place.
Very cool.
that's
And that
fascinating.
and that and that's going to be not in such short order. Our focus is going to be initially, deploying that infrastructure outside of the United States and in non, major metropolitan areas within the United States. But ultimately, as some of my non-competes disappear, we'll enter other areas as well. Ultimately, I think it is going to be a revolution. I think wireless is going to change a lot. It's going to simplify things. Again, imagine buying a car, setting up a payment system, never have to dealing with it again. And also remember something, it's going to impact the cost of these vehicles.
Yeah.
Because with wireless charging, you could have much smaller batteries in the vehicles and still have a viable methodology of transportation.
Yeah. And it makes them more efficient too, right? Because the
Sure.
weight reduces the efficiency. So
Correct.
yeah. Oh, that's an amazing future. I can't
Yes,
wait to see the first wireless charging road. I'd love to
I
drive down
agree. And by the way, we're seeing the impact of it already. And we're, getting into conversation about easy fill. There are a lot less gas stations in the world now than there ever been.
it.
I think we're at a 20-year low in the United States of gas stations.
Mm.
I know globally, a lot of these gas stations are being repositioned because they're in phenomenal, corners or areas,
Yeah.
and they're no longer viable as gas stations. So you're seeing a lot less gas stations available. And ultimately, that's why we have that easy fill solution. It's being able to bring the gas, the diesel, to whether it's a boat, a jet ski, trucks, fleet vehicles like Amazon and Kroger's and all the other ones that we have. And you can see from our revenue growth in that business, that is just an amazingly convenient solution. And it's really overcoming the issue of not having as many gas stations, as there used to be. I'm in Manhattan today. On one stretch of land, on one street, literally on 10th Avenue in Manhattan, over 3 or 4 blocks, and there used to be more gas stations than there are now in the entire Manhattan,
Oh
in
wow.
one block,
Wow.
in one street. And all of those are now condo buildings. And we're seeing this, by the way, in every corner of the world, whether it's Athens or Paris or London, or New York or San Francisco. Especially in certain areas in this country, it's almost legislatively impossible to open up new gas stations. So how do you fill up all these vehicles that need to get gas until they convert over to EV? So that's why we have a solution, and we're the only company right now that can literally handle any fleet provider and supply them with the fuel they need today, fuel they need tomorrow, and then into the future. And we're helping these fleet operators, and we're holding their hands and helping them convert from gasoline and diesel to EV. And we're not only providing the infrastructure, but actually the power generation in order to do so.
Fascinating.
That's wonderful. It's really interesting.
It's really cool. Just imagine, right? I can mention names, but one of our, our main customers, and they have like these logistics centers, right? And imagine in short order, you'll have a drone flyover, and you'll see in the facility on their rooftops, you'll see, NextNRG solar panels. Not that we manufacture them, but partnership. You'll see solar canopies over their employee lots. You'll see solar canopies, above their fleet lots. You'll see our energy storage modules, batteries, big battery packs throughout their facilities. Inside their facilities, they'll be wirelessly charging all their forklifts and all their robotics. And outside, we'll be doing wireless charging at the dock. So while these vehicles are getting filled with the goods that they're about to deliver, they're wirelessly getting charged at that dock, with no impediment to the loading process whatsoever. And at the same time, you'll see all the vehicles that are gasoline based getting filled up by our Easy Fill trucks. That's the future of this company. We have the ability of really supplying fleet operators with the solutions they need for today as well as for tomorrow. And it's not only powering those vehicles, those solar canopies and those solar panels are powering the entire facility. The lights, the air conditioning, the computers, and so on. So we're not just, like I was in my Blink days, getting electricity from a third party, maybe selling some equipment to that, party and making a little spread on the electricity. We're actually generating that electricity locally, so they could be off grid. We're managing and storing that electricity as well through our proprietary solutions and software and hardware. And then ultimately filling, again, the vehicles as well as any of the other electricity needs that they have, including data centers and storage and so on. So it's a whole different model. And when you look at our businesses, our individual businesses, our wireless charging business with the technology we have and the IP that we have, standing alone, it could be a multi-billion-dollar business. When you look at our smart microgrid business and energy generation, multi-billion-dollar business. When you look at Easy Fill, just growing as it's growing and keep on getting more and more traction out there, that has the potential of being maybe hundreds of millions or multi-billion-dollar business. But when you add all of them together and you have a solution combined, it's like nothing else out there in the world. There's nobody else that can help a fleet operator take them from where they are today into the future, and have the technology and the IP to back it up.
Future-proofed full-service energy provider.
That's it.
Wow.
So it's called transportation. It's fueling the transportation industry, no matter where it goes and how it develops. That's it. We're in the fueling business, helping these, helping all fleet operators. And again, it's not only for the fleet. That's our entree into the location. Our main goal is to provide them with every kilowatt hour of energy that they need, for all their different needs throughout their facilities. That's our ultimate goal. But when we look at Easy Fill is like a feeder for our business, because now we have the ears of major companies, and we're giving them a service today that now opens up the door for us to provide them with other services as well. When we started with Amazon, it was just fueling with gasoline, and now we're looking at other opportunities.
Very cool. Very cool. Well, thank you. I'm looking at the time, and I want to respect your time. Make sure that you get to see family and everything.
Oh, that's later. The work hours come first. As one of my original mentors told me, friends and family come after work.